Well, I was going to say, so Tom, I'm very glad that you didn't include that 10th option in your recommendations, because the point that there is a democratic relationship between the mayor and Londoners, and this whole situation has arisen through a series of issues that actually relate to trust and confidence, and the trust and confidence of Londoners in our police service. So yes, very glad that option 10 was not included. So I want to look very specifically at the options that you present to us, and it's really useful, the questioning from Assembly Member Moema just earlier, where so Tom, you said London is a unique situation, and there's an uncomfortable but coherent relationship, I think you described, for the governance relationship for the police. And the Mayor set out very helpfully that the 2011 Act is very clear that primacy is with the Mayor rather than with the Home Secretary. So just getting into the actual options that we're looking at. So the first one, which is the policing protocol, and it's about strengthening to replace the obligation to have regard to the protocol with an obligation to comply with it. And I'm just concerned that that might actually fetter the work of the Mayor in oversight of the Met. And I'm going to just give my comments on option 2 at the same time, because you, in your paragraph 380, you refer to those two together. You describe the hardening of the policing protocol and the mandatory mediation are the softest of the options, but they're worthwhile. Their circumvention would still bring considerable political and public criticism. Now, in terms of mandatory mediation, actually, I think that could be helpful if relationships between the Commissioner and MOPAC were difficult. Having a sort of being able to call in mandatory mediation might actually be helpful. But I was just worried about the strengthening of have regard to comply with, and I just wondered if either of you had anything you wanted to say on those two before I move to the next one.
The protocol, the legal obligation in relation to the protocol is the same as the legal obligation in relation to the police and crime plan, which is an obligation to have regard. Have regard doesn't just mean have a read and then put it in the bin. Have regard actually has a special legal status. I'll be happy to provide a lengthy legal opinion to the committee as to what it actually means, because I've had a lot to do with that. But it means really you ought to follow it unless you've got a compelling reason not to.
Which is why I'm questioning why one would strengthen it to comply.
Because in this case it was not complied with.
But setting up of future governance relationship between the Mayor and the Commissioner, given the complex situation of London, based on one set of circumstances. There might be all manner of other sets of circumstances, but you've already said how have regard to doesn't mean set it aside and put it in a cupboard. It means have you paid due regard to it. And I just wonder whether that is a worthwhile thing to pursue forward, given that having regard to it ought to do the job.
Well, it ought to do the job, but it didn't in this case. But you say an obligation to comply might fetter the work or fetter the functions or the freedom of action of the Mayor. Yes, but then there are lots of rules of law that can constrain the acts of public authorities, including the ordinary rules of public administrative law to act rationally, procedurally, fairly and lawfully. So it is a strengthening, It shouldn't be necessary, but I think in this case it is a worthwhile thing. The protocol is of enormous importance, as determined by the Divisional Court in the South Yorkshire case, which I refer to at length in my report. I was an interested party in that case as a litigant, of course. You mentioned, if I may just come back to a couple of things you said before, very, very briefly. You said it is clear that the mayor has primacy in London over the Home Secretary. In some respects, yes, the mayor is on the front foot in terms of the day-to-day things. The mayor and the commissioner come here to do is, of course, very conspicuous, but not in all things, not in appointment and not in removal, and that's important. And of course, then there's the power of the purse strings. It was also suggested, I think, that some of the options could undermine or damage the democratic relationship. Sorry, option 10, which is not one of my options. That this would be undermining and contrary to the democratic relationship between the mayor and Londoners. I just make the point there is nothing undemocratic of an address passed by the House of Commons.
Mr. Mayor, did you want to come in there?
Just firstly, every police and crime commissioner has their purse strings dictated by the Home Secretary and the government. So the anomaly is in the hire and fire. But I think we're in danger of losing the bigger picture with respect. Look, the government said, in its own words, that the 2011 Act, the introduction of PCCs, I'm the PCC, and I quote, is the most significant democratic reform of policing in our lifetime. Right? So Parliament must have intended for there to be a game changer with the PCCs being developed. And what the protocol says is the establishment of PCCs has allowed for the Home Office to withdraw from day-to-day policing matters, giving the police freedom to fight crime as they see fit, and allowing local communities to hold the police to account by the elected mayor doing that. Now, what is a problem in the police that the Commissioner failed to address? Trust and confidence. It's intrinsic to the series of scandals that led to the straw that breaks the camel back. What is the response from Sir Tom? It's to remove even more the powers from Londoners and their democratically elected mayor, police and crime commissioner, and give it to who? The then Home Secretary, Priti Patel.
Although, to be fair to Sir Tom, he did not include option 10. But I agree. There
options 3, 4,
I'm coming
6,
to options
7, 9.
I'm coming
all
to
take away
those.
power from London.
I'm absolutely coming to those. So option 3, with the giving the Home Secretary. Looking at the Home Secretary's powers under Section 40 of the Police Act of '96. So the Home Secretary is actually able to veto a resignation, and that might even mean that a commissioner was forced to stay even if they wanted to resign. Then we get to the delayed resignation with HMCIC, so where the Commissioner indicates an intention to resign, the matter must first be investigated by HMCIC. So the Chief Inspector of Constabulary could be required to investigate the matter, but what if there's a whole clause at 360 which says if MOPAC fails to cooperate and provide information to the investigation in a timely manner, the investigation should assume that MOPAC has no reasons and should report accordingly. But what if the Commissioner fails to cooperate? It feels like this has been written in a way that is written only from the perspective, or that particular one, only from the perspective of looking out for the interests of the Commissioner. And if we're looking forward to the future, we need to be looking at both sides of that relationship. Then we get to option 5, which is interesting in relation to the Assembly, and it talks about introducing new legislation, and I just wanted to clarify on the London Assembly recommendation. because it says, if the London Assembly's right to approve or veto the Mayor's removal of the Commissioner were denied by circumvention, the Assembly could be required to consider a vote of no confidence in the Mayor. Now, I just wanted to clarify, Sir Tom, do you mean that the Assembly should have a veto on a Commissioner's resignation, or just a veto on a Mayor starting a statutory process for resignation?
The latter.
The latter. Thank you very much for that clarity. So we then get to option 6, which is the veto by HMCIC, and that it absolutely plays to the point of giving the power to unelected people, and, you know, in terms of the issues, particularly the issues we have in London, with the extreme issues of broken trust and confidence, and the need to get Londoners on board with really believing that the police service is not misogynistic, sexist, racist, and all the other things that have come out in this series of really shocking events. So we want, you know, that seems worrying because it's giving the power to the unelected HMCIC. Then the Home Secretary having a veto at the very beginning of the process, which kind of undermines the point of having a process in the first place if the Home Secretary can veto a process from the very beginning. We then get the recreation of the Metropolitan Police Authority, but I think you even say that doing that is probably a step too far. The London Assembly and the Police and Crime Panel are well established and adequately informed and resourced, can work well. And you also mentioned particularly if a 2/3 majority in the Assembly is adopted. And then we get to the removal of the power of MOPAC.
Assembly Member Russell, you're going to ask a question at the...
Yes, I'm going to...
Excellent, that's fine,
I most certainly am, but I'm raising several questions about these options as I go through, and I will then come back both to Sir Tom and the Mayor. And in terms of option 9, the removal of the power of MOPAC to remove the Commissioner, I'm not sure that would solve the issue of the Commissioner feeling any pressure to resign, but also that again comes back to the mandate point. So, Sir Tom, out of all these options, do you, I mean, you know, to what it looks like to me is mandatory mediation could be helpful. We could possibly do something with the London Assembly and us having some kind of 2/3 majority vote on a decision to ask the Commissioner to resign. We are elected to hold the Mayor accountable, so that might help with the sort of democratic process. But it sort of feels like the options slightly run out of possibility for being helpful.
I'll give a brief response to that. My recommendations are not about removing the powers of Londoners and through their elected representatives. It's about making the Mayor of London more cautious before he, and I don't talk about Mr. Khan, I talk about a notional mayor, making the mayor more cautious before embarking upon a course of conduct of the kind described in part 1. You make the point, it's all about, it appears to be one-sided. Well, it's not about, it really isn't about being one-sided. It's about protecting a chief officer from a politician behaving badly. It's about protection. It's about respecting and reinforcing the very special constitutional position of senior police officer, in this case the Commissioner of the Met, but there's inevitably a read-on to all the rest of England and Wales, of course, because the senior police officer, the Commissioner of the Met or a chief constable elsewhere, is not just a chief executive of a public corporation, because of the unique powers of the police over citizens, the power to stop and search, the power to take away your liberty, the power to charge you, the power to search your home and your person, all those things, the coercive, the unique coercive power of the state over the citizen, is extremely important that police officers, who are very special in this respect, have appropriate protections from undue political intervention. But I entirely endorse the point that the Mayor made earlier, that the Policing Protocol and the Police Reform Social Responsibility Act 2011 did effect the greatest change in the democratic public accountability of the police in our lifetimes. In Annex 1 of my report, I explain that the Metropolitan Police is one of the oldest public institution in London, and until 2000 it was not accountable to any local authority. And so it is an improvement, but it's an improvement provided everybody sticks to the rules.
I think you just set out, those powers, those very particular powers that the police have to stop us, to search us, to strip search us. These are powers that the police, the new commissioner has been very clear, have been misused by the Met in London. And so the importance of that elected relationship with the relationship between the people being policed and the people they elect to provide the governance just feels all the more important.
It is important, and I remind the committee of what the Mayor said on the Andrew Marr programme about a year ago, which is the operational independence of the police is enormously important, and no politician, whether he's the Mayor of London or anyone else, should be able to give directions to the police to go and arrest that person or search that person or not arrest that particular person. Operational independence is of enormous importance, and I shall shortly be giving a public lecture on that subject.
I think we can all agree that operational independence is important, but we also need to make sure that that the people who are being policed have confidence and trust in the way that they're being policed. Mr. Mayor, did you want to comment on any of these recommendations?
I think you can guess my views on many of the recommendations. I've explained that recommendations 3, 4, 6, 7, 9 basically are in direct contradiction to the 2011 Act, and they're against what we've experienced in London over the last few years. And look, I mean, I don't want to be unnecessarily offensive, but I think this shows that Sir Tom's bias is seeped into Part 2 as well, in relation to,
Mr. Mayor, can you just be pleasant during this part of it, please?
Chair, hopefully we will pay attention to what has been discussed about these recommendations when we as a committee make our response to this report.
Well, we certainly will.
May I just,
yeah.
I won't deal with the bias point because I think we've done that to death. But the Mayor is entirely right. The recommendations that I'm making in pretty much all 9 options are in contradiction of the regime in the Police Reform and Social Responsibility Act 2011. They are proposals or options for consideration in relation to the amendment of the 2011 Act, because the 2011 Act and the Policing Protocol Order 2011 made under the Act have been found to be insufficient to control the actions of a determined politician who does not comply with the law.
And this just confirms, Caroline, the
Thank
point you were making earlier on about the out-of-touchness in relation to what Londoners feel with the lack of trust and confidence, the out-of-touchness with the former Commissioner, the former Chief Inspector, the former Deputy Commissioner, the former Home Secretary, and so forth. Let me be quite clear. I don't resile from my position that I'd lost trust and confidence in the former Commissioner's ability to address the systemic and cultural issues that was shown by a series of scandals,
right,
and her inability to address the lack of trust and confidence.
We are running out of
Thank
time.
you.
Can we stick to these options?